Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Other Minds and Hands. This is Corey Olsen, the Tolkien professor, joined as always by Maggie Parke, and this is our 100th episode. What a fun day for Other Minds and Hands. Oh, I should also add, I'm joined as usual, or not as usual, but as occasionally, by a small dog who's insisting on licking my hands. So any, there may be some odd background noises today, as has happened before, whether it be licking or snoring. And anyway, that's what's happening.
Pixie is our official mascot.
Yeah,
so
yeah, she kind of is. She's been in Rings and Realms credits before, so that makes her officially.
She was at the studio with us last week.
Yes, she
Pretty
was.
great. Have her in the middle of the table for our meeting.
Yes, yeah. It's one of the nice things about having a little dog. You just put her up on the table, and that keeps her from wandering off. Anyway, so good to be with everybody here on episode 100. What we wanted to do today is kind of sort of reflect back a little bit, but mostly look forward a little bit. Maggie and I have been wanting to have a conversation about kind of where we go from here, and what we do and how we do things, and also thinking about some other projects, some other Signum Studios projects that we're working on. So that's what we're going to do today. Yeah,
you guys.
Exactly. Yeah, we've been kind of having these discussions. We've been saying, like, we really need to sit down and talk about this more, and we're like, you know what? Let's involve everybody in this. We're
going to go town hall style on this.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, for a lot of different reasons. Want to take a look at what we've done, but mostly like where we could go. And you guys are the ones that know the most about this space, along with us. So
yeah,
it makes sense to turn it into a community conversation.
Yeah, well, one thing I would just want to begin with, Maggie, is I have to admit that this show has already become and done so much more than I ever expected. When we began it was there were some like immediate issues. I mean, of course, It was in the context of the build up to season 1 of the Rings of Power, and it wasn't that it was about the Rings of Power. It was about the issues that the build up to the Rings of Power was raising.
It was in reaction to the things that came up from them.
That was an important moment. I think remains an important moment in Tolkien fandom as a whole, because it's a moment. Tolkien fandom already had its moment where it got its first adaptation, and that's always a difficult time for a fandom when they get their very first adaptation.
That's such a sweet way to phrase it. It's a difficult time for a fandom when you get your first adaptation. That's so absolutely true.
It is. I say first adaptation. Whenever I call the Peter Jackson one the first adaptation, like, Rankin Bass and Bakshi fans always get mad at me. Of course, there were earlier adaptations too, but I mean, everybody can see why there are differences there, right? I mean, the Bakshi didn't finish, for instance, right? So, like, there in fact never had been a complete adaptation. And even if you kind of put together the Return of the King, the Fellowship of the Ring Bakshi film and the Return of the King Rankin Bass film, and don't mourn over much for the part in the middle that got missed, like, it's still like it is not. It doesn't even, when you stitch it together, combine to a singular vision. Yeah, exactly. Very much not a singular vision. The
question of not a singular project. It wouldn't tick that box.
Yeah. So anyway, there were many ways in which the Peter Jackson adaptation really was the first, and not least because it had been so long. It was like 25 years since the Bakshi one came out anyway. And now, of course, it's been about 25 years again. And so when the Rings of Power came out again, now there was this whole new situation, right? This whole new situation, like, first of all, a whole new set of adaptation decisions, which raised a lot of questions in people's mind, which it seemed to me at the time, one of the things that I felt that I was seeing, especially on social media, was simply the fact that, like, a lot of people didn't have, like, categories for, like, talking and thinking about adaptation and how adaptation works. So like the whole question, of course, many of the questions that you and I have been talking about for reasons since the very first episode was, things like, what does it mean for an adaptation to be faithful? Like when you're hoping for faithfulness from an adaptation, what does that even mean? What's like okay and not okay, and how can you tell, and how do you judge, and how do you manage your own feelings compared with, what's going on?
Yeah, and just that idea of the emotions attached to it. Why are the emotions so strong, and why are the spaces not safe for us to think these questions through?
Yes.
And it was nice to just be able to talk about that. Of course, this is an emotive thing. This is something that people feel very close to. And when a fandom has to deal with their first adaptation, it is a very volatile thing to encounter.
Yes.
But it doesn't have to be a fight. It doesn't have to be confrontation. It can be a space where we get curious. And it was nice to be able to kind of consider that. And it was also a really interesting time to do it because we're 25 years after the Jackson trilogy. So we also have a new definition of our adaptations because of this giant adaptation in the middle of it.
Yes.
So it was a fantastic case study for adaptation because it's gone through so many of its own remediations.
Yes.
That
Yes.
we get to kind of play around with what does it mean to redefine something. And when you say that's not canon, who do you mean? Like,
Exactly.
whose canon is this, right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
it was really fun to play in a safe space, but there weren't many safe spaces out there.
Exactly. Yeah, and I know that was one of our very first motivations, was creating a safe space where it's okay to ask questions. Like it's not, there were, obviously, you and I have been considered apologists or shills for the Rings of Power from the beginning, because we weren't, we weren't hating it. We weren't speaking strongly against it. But that was a risk we were willing to take because and I still find, as I have always found, that the Rings of Power is very interesting to think about. It's a fascinating adaptation to discuss, to study.
I love it when even off camera people will be like, but what did you actually think? What do you... I still think it's super fun to talk about. Like
exactly.
holding that line, it is really, really interesting to do analysis of.
Yeah, and I'm still gonna, as I usually do and try to do, I'm still gonna hold off until, the thing is done one way or another before I say whether or not I, like it, whether I think it's awesome or whatever. But what I do know for sure is that it's really interesting, and it's something that I've reflected on frequently since we began, basically, since we spent so much time with Rings and Realms on the Rings of Power stuff, is as I watched other adaptations, I'm like, okay, the Rings of Power really is an unusually interesting adaptation to discuss. Like it's not just
we're a little biased because of your background and things like that.
Yeah, it's a Tolkien adaptation. Yeah.
Even if we were experts in, Wheel of Time or something like that, I think we would still have to talk about this if we were doing an adaptation podcast because it's just really interesting and there's just a lot going on, and the longevity of it. If you're talking about 5 seasons over, who knows, 10 years, something like that.
It's such an interestingly big project. So yeah, absolutely. Anyways,
so that's where we started.
That's where we started. And of course, like as things have moved on, I know for me, I never expected, I never anticipated how much I would learn over the course of doing Other Minds and Hands. I don't know. There's a lot that I have learned from all of my different broadcasts. Over the years, Film has really shaped my own approach to, especially to creative engagement and to storytelling. I've learned a lot from doing Film, as well as learning a lot about the Silmarillion. Of course, like exploring the Lord of the Rings has really opened my eyes about so many things in the Lord of the Rings text. There have been, my goodness, going through the history of Middle-earth and Mythgard Academy has been, sort of life-changing as well. But at the end of the day, maybe it's because I had so much more to learn, because I knew so much. My baseline was so much lower, right, when it came to adaptation stuff. But hang on, I'm trying to move things around with the dog here. We're good. Anyway, that I've just been more cognizant of it, but it has really opened my eyes about so many things, and I just find my whole experience of watching adaptation, even of reading books, there's so many things that I notice now when I'm reading a familiar book, a new book, where I'm like, okay, that was a scene that worked really well, but that would be really hard to put on film. Like that, like you'd have to do that. You'd have to try to accomplish the same thing. You'd have to approach that scene totally differently. And
we've been so lucky being able to talk to different practitioners too, that when I started doing adaptation studies, that was such the game changer of the people that actually make the decisions, learning the thought processes in a really small scope.
Yes.
And then we've been able to grow it out. So, being able to talk to Bear McCreary and Leith and things like that, to hear about the processes that go into all of this.
Yes.
You can't help but engage with any kind of text in a slightly different way. That now when I read something, you're kind of going through it in your head like, how would I do that?
Yes.
Why would I do it that way? How would Leith do it? How would Bear influence this? How
Right.
would Jordan have something to say about this? How would Stephen, you get to pull in this plethora of wealth and expertise that we've just had a tiny crack of access to, and it just changes the game. So being able to have that conversation with each other and all those people, and have that massively change our own scope and engagement with adaptation, it just kind of sets me firmer in what we're doing, because all those haters and naysayers and shills and everything else are just reactive to a singular thing and not willing to engage in the conversation.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean one's better than the other. It just means because I've engaged in the conversation, I have a much better understanding of a lot of stuff. And I did know a ton about adaptation before this, but not about this specific thing.
Yes.
So being able to take all that experience into the backstage side of an active adaptation with the biggest budget, with one of the biggest studios, with a really huge cast, it's been a lot of fun.
That's been a really interesting case study. Yeah, it's been a really neat opportunity, and fun, of course. And recently with the War of the Rohirrim and the conversations we've been able to have there, we've again been able to sort of continue that experience. Yeah, so it's been really good. So one of the topics that Maggie and I have been kind of talking around a little bit is, where exactly do we go from here? How do we move forward? Of course, as over the course of the last couple of years, during various seasons, of course, it's a little bit easier to figure out what to talk about when we're in the middle of a high season of, anticipating the release of the War of the Rohirrim, or in the middle of or building up to one of the seasons of Rings of Power, the kind of the central Tolkien adaptations that are going on right now. That stuff has been good. But then, of course, in the seasons in between those times, I have had so much fun in the different projects that we've done, like our opening scenes project, where we went through and looked at various books and various films, looking at those opening scenes as case studies of how you approach things differently. There's so many of those things are, discussions of the Christmas Carol, like the sort of the Charles Dickens case study. Yeah.
That one about the Christmas Carol, where you zeroed in on that instantaneous moment where the
core
heart
of the original. Yes.
The core.
Yes.
All of a sudden, adaptation took on yet another meaning of you just have to find that core.
Just have to find that central core, and you've
in.
got the thing. There's so many things you can change. Yeah. And it's, absolutely. So anyway, that's, those things, though. So one of the thoughts I know, Maggie, that you and I have mentioned to each other before is a desire on the one hand to kind of be a little bit more systematic if it were possible. You know, there are so many things that we can do. We've had so many different ideas and lots of different suggestions, whether it be about books that we could do. There's other things that we've sort of started and not been able to finish or gotten pulled away from and haven't gotten back to. Like I really wanted to do another example of like those pivotal scenes, those core scenes. There's so many things, so many, like
the terminology glossary that we're going to create.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And there's so much I don't know, there's so many inquiries I would like to do, some studies I would like to perform that we haven't had time to yet. So like for instance, we talked about this before. Choosing those scenes. Again, this is one of the things that we started but we didn't get to finish. Choosing scenes where the book and the film are very, very similar. Like where everybody who watches the film would say the film follows the book really, really closely here. Yeah. And look at those scenes in the books and in the films, to do close readings of those and see how is that accomplished? How is that? Because one of the things that I would really like to understand better are what are the things where it's easier to, what does it even mean to stay close to the book is one question that I have,
and
what determines
benefit?
that? Yeah.
And to what benefit, right? Like why are we
Yeah.
really close here?
Yeah.
And what effect does that have? Because sometimes that means things slow right down.
Yeah.
That might not be the best.
Yeah. How does that scene, which followed so closely, fit into the film as a whole, as a story, right? How does, what does it mean to do it? How close is close, actually? Like how much of the I would like to kind of investigate that a little bit, because I have a sort of theory that
could be bunnies.
I have a sort of theory that even in places where people say it follows it really closely, when we look at it really closely, I think we'll notice tons of differences. Or at least tons of additional decisions that are being made in the film version that are not made in the, which means, and when that happens, that means there's a wide scope for it to feel close for people whose internal visions of the scene is similar to the internal vision of the scene of the filmmakers, and for it to seem much less close to people who don't.
And to play with the opportunities. I don't think we've talked about that a ton. We've talked about texts that turn into longer and really beautiful films and are very different from the short story that they originate from and things like that. But sometimes film is able to do something that a text isn't. So that kind of opposite side, like what opportunities can a film take to take something that isn't achievable in a text and move that into a new space? And how does that, dare I say it, improve, a storytell?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and like to look at any of these sort of notions, right? To make any of these inquiries would require some time, right? And some work. We'd have to be able to sit down and do real close readings.
Close analysis.
Close analysis.
Which, spoiler, guys, we don't do a lot of prep before this usually.
Yeah, that's one challenge. One challenge is that we're both, we're both committed to doing the show, but we can't let the show take over and prevent us doing everything else that we're also trying to achieve. So it's hard. We don't have too much time for prep. So that is one of the things that's always challenging to handle. But of course, there's another major challenge, which we've been running up against for years and been kind of trying to manage. And that is that it's not really possible to do close analysis of film on this medium, because we can't show clips. We can't show the video because both Twitch and YouTube will, cut it. If
knock us down.
Will take us down. Even if we are doing a perfectly legitimate academic analysis of a thing, which is totally legal and no violation of copyright, and yet Twitch and YouTube won't have it. So the mechanics of the licensing agreements of, our two primary vehicles here, YouTube and Twitch, make close analysis of film here in this very, very difficult. That's been hard. I mean, as as you viewers know, we have tried to get around this in a couple different ways. There are some times where we're able to look at stills as a kind of a placeholder for a scene. That is better than nothing, but it's still not a great way especially when you want to look at things like pacing and the changes of camera angles over the course of a scene and stuff. I mean, you can flip, you
hard.
can, and again, and then it, you can maybe we could moderate that if we had a lot more time to prep and, could create 45 different images and make a flip book or something, but anyway, it's hard. So that's one. That's what, and of course the other thing is often we'll just kind of vaguely discuss it. We'll do it in this totally non-visual way. Remember in this scene when this happens, and and the problem is that it's really easy to let mistakes of, like, there are lots of things you don't notice. I mean, think about, there's a reason why when I'm doing Exploring the Lord of the Rings, I always have the full text on the screen
Right there.
because like if you can't refer to it all the time, if you're not basing your analysis on what is visible there at all times, then it's really easy to get off the
That's a really good example too of, like, we've talked about wanting to be a bit more systematic and structured in some of this analysis. Like Exploring Lord of the Rings, very clear what you're doing.
Right.
You're starting at the beginning and you're working your way through.
Right.
So you guys, if you're on Collaboratory, you might have seen that we're doing that with Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings as a project. So, we're very slowly working our way through Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings and doing scene analysis. But on Collaboratory, we can do that. So I don't know if you want to talk through options, but like, that is one of the things we've talked about, that we would love to do deeper analysis like that, but it would have to live on Collaboratory. So
because we couldn't show it here.
Yeah. So like, does it become a model like once a month we do a live one, once a month we do a Collaboratory one? TBD, but these are all kind of options of what we're thinking about.
One of the solutions to the visuals issue is we can fix it in post, right? In theory, we could take some of the discussion that we're doing and take the raw video from our broadcast and have some of our folks do editing on it so that we can do overlays from the videos, from the films that we're discussing over top of what we're saying, kind of like we did in Rings and Realms. And that's possible. That's adding a lot of time. Video editing is time consuming, and it doesn't solve the I want to be able to be looking at it when we do our analysis problem at all. But it points in the direction of one of the kinds of things that we've been thinking. That what if we took Other Minds and Hands and made it into more of a sort of a hybrid experience where some of what we're doing with Other Minds and Hands we're doing, like in the studio, and some we're doing, some we're doing live in broadcast form. One of the things that I know, Maggie, we both agreed about is that we wouldn't want to change Other Minds and Hands in such a way that we didn't being able to interact with you guys and with your questions and thoughts and stuff was literally why this began, right? We don't want to lose the safe space to discuss this stuff.
And with each other too. I feel like this is the safest space that Corey and I have too.
Yes.
To like kind of work through some ideas.
Yeah.
And we've said it before in other projects, but it is so much more beneficial to do these kind of exercises with something like a Christmas Carol.
Yes.
So when the power comes up, we're a lot better.
Yeah.
We're sharper, we understand, we've read some stuff, we've seen some things, we, know how the other might fall on the topic and can talk about it more freely.
Yes.
So I don't want to lose that space where we get to just kind of ponder.
Yes.
And look at something fresh that isn't contentious. But I don't know if it's something that needs to happen every week either. So
Yeah, exactly. Because it is true that one of the things, like, unfortunately, if we're talking about a solution or like a path forward that involves more production, right? Neither of our would be great fun. Neither of our lives will accommodate, hey, let's keep doing what we're doing, but let's make it 4 times more time consuming than it is now. Like, we can't do that. Like, that's not realistic. So yeah, it does seem, as you suggested, that one of the things that would be sort of necessary if we did a higher production version, or even intermittent higher production versions of Other Minds and Hands, would be to they'd have to be a little bit more intermittent, essentially.
Yeah, so I mean the thought like I mean there's a lot of different thoughts, but like I do wonder if we could do like a film a month or a film every 2 months. So like maybe one this guys, we're just spitballing with each other. We
Yeah,
haven't talked about this either.
that's
But
totally,
like
yeah.
I wonder if there's a space where like we can still do our live thing exactly as we do it, and maybe we're working through an article. Maybe we're
Hmm.
talking about that film casting decision that's just come up, Narnia Aslan. We'll talk about that soon.
Yes, yes.
Like I still want to be reactive to the stuff that's going on
Yeah,
because we are that
there's
live,
lots of
safe
interesting stuff to
space.
discuss. Yeah, yeah.
Right. But like once a month, we chat about the film that we're going to be doing analysis on, and the next month we do an analysis. Maybe it's 2 hours, maybe it's 90 minutes, but it's you and me watching the film, maybe pausing, maybe talking, maybe just fan tracking with the thing behind it, but that becomes the collaboratory thing, so we have the footage as well.
Yeah.
But I like that that would give us like a playlist and a body of work that we have
Hmm.
done some pretty deep analysis and seen
Yes.
analysis on, but we'd still have all the live stuff that we love doing.
Yeah, that would be fun. That would be fun. Um, and it does seem, if we could do, as you say, some slightly more systematic, um, which is again no different from stuff that we've done, stuff that we've begun, or um, sort of been able to do intermittently. If we could continue some of those things, and then it is true, as you say, we couldn't distribute them on YouTube and Twitch, because of they wouldn't let us. Um, but uh, so um, but yeah, we could still make them available. We could still make them publicly available, through the collaboratory, and the Signum store. Like, we could make them available there for free,
Yeah.
um, to everybody. But again, that's at least a thing that we could do. But anyway, yeah. So I think being able to have that series, I feel like I know what I want to do. Like I like discussing news, again, continuing the sort of safe space. Like,
Mm-hmm.
we could even today have some discussion of Meryl Streep, because I think that's a
Mm-hmm.
really interesting and complicated question. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I, uh, so I definitely want to do that. But I have often felt that I've often felt a bit torn between the desire to, like, sort of discuss the latest stuff that's out, and the desire to continue the more systematic, more sort of slightly more academic, I guess, kind of teaching series, analysis
Mm-hmm.
series that we're wanting to do. That feels to me like the natural growth of Other Minds and Hands has been in that direction, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've laid a lot of really been useful to me, groundwork, right, in understanding adaptations. We've done a few interesting case studies. I think that there's much more that could be gained, and I feel like most of what there is to be gained. It's like, for me, it's like my own. I don't know. It's sort of like when you're learning a language, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you sort of feel like, okay, like, I'm ready to start trying to read this book in that language, and it will be challenging, but like, that's like the next stage. Like, if I'm going to continue, like, learning,
Yeah.
that's like the logical next step of learning. And for me, that's what I feel this is like, to be able to do, um, instead of just the sort of more or less completely spontaneous analysis that comes up, when we're discussing, news and particular issues
Yeah.
that arise. So again, it's one thing to say, hey, let's think about the casting decision for Aslan in the Narnia series, and that will lead to a discussion of casting decisions and the impact of casting decisions and the basis upon which, you know, you make casting decisions and how all those things work out. We'll do that, and that'll be really interesting. But it isn't the same thing as being able to be doing more systematic, more kind of rigorous analysis of, you know, the relationship between a film and a book.
And I think that's why the
dig in.
two kind of threads logically work in my brain, and it's reminding me of like the work that we did do early days with Rings and Realms and Rings of Power, that, you know, you kind of watch through it and you talk about it and you think about it and you're doing this kind of light analysis, and then you distill it down to something really well thought out and scripted that we put on a teleprompter and we record, you know? So there's that slight difference of the deep analysis that we get to do with preparation versus the reactionary analysis that we get to do in discussion. Both are so valid and so important that it makes sense that they kind of feed into each other a little bit more smoothly. And it is making me think about, like, you know, the corridor crew and stuff like that, that they have their free content, they have their chit chat, but then they have all this other stuff. And it's like, well, it's kind of what we already do. Let's just see if we can make it accessible for everybody here.
Yes.
They'll get to play.
And it is one of the, I mean,
more
related to the question of, like, you know, where do we go and what exactly do we do in Other Minds and Hands, is the question, where do we go and what do we do with Rings and Realms exactly?
Right.
You know?
And like, it's not just for like you guys in this discussion too, but like, you know, think of all the folks that we've been able to sit down and chat with in the last 2 years, and all the conversations that we're currently have looking ahead as a studio. We want to be pretty clear about who we are and what we do. And it's really hard to do that when we're not really sure, because we just like talking about stuff. So,
Exactly.
and I don't want to change that, but I think we can kind of change like our MO or our mission statement a little bit.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It is another good reason to be having both Other Minds and Hands and Rings and Realms be a little bit more directed, to be thinking about what it is that we are producing, like that, what is the body of work that we are producing, and you know, what does it do and to what does it tend, you know, that is those are all, I think, really, really good and important things. Yeah, anyway, I see. Yes, the Angmar Archives was just asking about Wheel of Time. And I have been hearing really good things. I haven't watched season 3 yet. I've been hearing really good things about season 3. I would love to return to that. And, you know, we did the one episode. Well, I did the one episode. It was on a week you weren't here. I did the one episode on season 1. Just because I wanted a chance. I love the Wheel of Time books, and know
I
them
haven't read them
pretty
so,
well. Yeah. And so I'm really excited to talk about them. It would be really interesting, now that that's in season 3 and seems to me, as far as I can see, to be on an upward trajectory. I think that might be an interesting thing to spend a little bit more time with. Even Maggie, if you haven't read the books, like that, you know, that actually might be an interesting angle on it. In fact,
it's nice to have fresh perspectives
for you to be thinking about
like
it just as a show, and
yeah, and I
know.
really do like it when I go to see a film with somebody that hasn't read the books and be like,
Right.
tell me what you thought of the film. Like,
Right.
did it work on its own? What
Right.
didn't make sense? And
yeah, there's and there are a lot of things I know. It's complicated. Like the first season, there's so many of the, I want to say, the fundamental things, like many of the basic elements of like how the magic system works and stuff like that, which are for which they've made some very interesting adaptation choices in the show. And of course, like, these are some of the things that I find, like, I mean, I have a lot of thoughts, but all of my thoughts are all tangled up in, you know, thinking about the book. And so there are a lot of things about it that I would really be interested in your a show only opinion of, just to be like, how much,
Yeah.
this feels confused to me, but does it feel that way only because I am consciously thinking about the discrepancies with the
Yeah.
book and trying to reckon, and so I'm not just taking in the story that they're telling me. I'm
Yeah.
doing all of this complicated comparing and contrasting and reconciling and working out in my head as I'm watching it. And so to me, there are places where I'm like, well, that episode was really, you know, I felt really confused. When I might just be the one who's confused because I'm
No, I
trying
kind
to
of,
do all this
yeah,
stuff.
I kind of love that angle too of like the expert and the noob
Yeah.
of of going through the same piece of work and having such different perspectives on it. Like that alone is a fun exercise, but it's also such a really good example of like people can have different opinions on the exact same
Yeah.
content and both are valid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we could maybe do a little mini series on it, even if we just did
Hmm.
like one show per episode, or per sorry, one
Hmm.
show per season rather, like a three episode mini series on the Wheel of
Hmm.
Time, um, would be a might be a
That would be
would be
fun.
a really interesting thing, but yeah, yeah. No, I see. Some people didn't realize that I knew the Wheel of Time. Absolutely, I've been reading the Wheel
Oh
of Time
yeah.
since it came out.
Corey's all
Yeah,
over
yeah. I
this.
was a Robert Jordan fan from day one. I read the Eye of the World in hardcover back in the '90s. So
And I
anyway, yeah.
believe Jordan's about to release a new soundscape
Soundscape. Yeah,
for Wheel of Time as well. Yeah.
I've heard some clips from it. It's kind of it's
Ooh.
pretty awesome, actually, unsurprisingly.
Cool.
Um, yeah, yeah, I like his Wheel Time Soundscape. But
Awesome.
anyway, I
Yeah.
think,
Anyway, so yeah, we
yeah,
don't want to lose any of this stuff because that's fun for us and it's really cool to be
yeah,
able to explore that. But
yeah, and under
it
no
would be really
circumstances would we make Other Minds and Hands just into like a studio project that was no longer
no,
broadcast live. Like, we absolutely we again we first and foremost don't want to lose the opportunity for people to have the safe space to talk and think about this stuff as we've been. That continues to be important. We do want to be thinking through the you know the role that we've been able to play, to have a place where people can come to think about the latest news, in a place where it's not just going to be they're not just going to be yelled at in one direction or another, with emotionally charged hot takes of a positive and or more commonly negative kind, is still
yeah.
somewhere where um, a space that we definitely want to continue to occupy as well. So um, I could
And I want to be
imagine.
able to have a space that
Yeah,
we definitely still get to talk to practitioners.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
I want to be able to go up to anybody that has worked on an adaptation project and be like, "Can you come talk to us about it?"
This has been
And
a
have
really
that
fun
be
place for interviews, and I would
right.
definitely want to keep doing that. I mean, this is where we would bring anybody who, with whom we got an opportunity to do an interview. So absolutely, even if we're doing other stuff, we would be
Yeah.
doing that as well. And so again, keep in mind, everybody, that one of the unfortunate parameters of our brainstorming and thinking about this is that whatever decision we make, like whatever plan we form, it can't be a plan that includes a massive increase to our time investment into Other Minds and Hands, because we don't have it. So that's unfortunately one of the parameters that we're having to work within here.
Yeah.
Because I mean,
But I
yes, like
would
in
like to
theory,
have
we could just do like a third series, or like basically continue to develop out and continue to produce Rings and Realms and have all of these closer analysis case studies be part of the Rings and Realms, sort of brand, while we continue doing Other Minds and Hands as we've been. But we can't do that. Like, we don't have time.
which would be
Yeah,
great if
it would
somebody
be
could
cool.
fund that from my day job. But yeah. Um, but I think having something where we do get to do a deep dive with visuals, and you guys can still get it for free on Collaboratory, but we would just put it there.
Yeah,
Like that would just be icing on the cake. And I think really good for us to grow as well that we get to do it for Rings and Realms. We've done it for Rings of Power. Guys, watching these things alongside Corey now, it's so different from when we started because you're picking up the visual language that was really fresh
Well, I've learned
last
so
time, you know?
much. Yeah. Yeah.
Like
It's
just
totally
the other
changed
day
how I watch things.
we were watching the opening of Fellowship on Thursday, and I was there with you and Kara, our line producer, and both of them were like, "Look at the angle of that, and look at the light coming down, and look at that." I was like, "Look at you guys!"
I like, it was like I had never even watched that scene before. Like I was
Yeah,
like, yeah, that particular scene, it was the scene with Bilbo and Gandalf confronting Bilbo after the party for him to release
yeah.
the ring. And I seriously, I was like watching that together. You triggered it by saying, what an interesting camera angle. And then as soon as you said that, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're right. Look. Oh, and look at this and look at that. And now he's doing this, you know, anyway, it's so cool. Like, it's really interesting. And,
And then we started talking about that of like every time we watch Fellowship or any of the trilogy, we want to have a different angle, a different lens that we're
yeah,
looking through, and like just watching the whole film looking at camera angles
yeah,
reveals so much.
yeah.
Watch it again, just looking at color. Watch it again, just looking at lighting.
You know what
You know,
occurs to me?
what's that?
What if, sometimes in the Other Minds in Hand slot, you and I were to actually just do a live recording of a fan track?
We could do well. We could do that, but we couldn't show it, right?
No, we couldn't show it. We couldn't show it. So you and I would have to be able to watch it like in a separate window that we're not
Yep.
broadcasting.
Like over
And
on the TV over here with headphones.
right, exactly. Or I could even have it on my iPad or something like that. Right.
Yeah.
Um, and so viewers would have to, like, you
Queue
could
up.
watch along with us. You'd have to just queue it up. And then you and I could just do an actual fan track that we recorded. And
That would be super fun because we
would
could do
be.
like a little bit of prep to make sure
Yeah.
we know it the same way we would with a fan track. I don't know if you guys have watched fan tracks or listened to fan tracks. We haven't done many yet, but it's like audio commentary. And we just watch live along. So we could do like a 90-minute something or an episode of something
Hmm.
and just tell you guys to hit play at the same time.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
might not be the most visually stunning episode we've ever
Well, no,
done,
it would just be you and me talking.
but it'd be kind of great.
It would be kind of great.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Phil says, wouldn't it be the longest episode ever? Well, it depends what we did.
Depends what we did. I mean, we
And we
still
can even break
need
it up. Like if we
and
could
we
do the Lord of the Rings films half at a time.
yeah. And we still need a fan track for season 2, episode 2 of Rings of Power. So maybe we start with that and it's you and
Yeah,
me
we
doing
could go through
that.
the Rings of Power even.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking of that because you were just alluding to this. We had been discussing, wouldn't it be cool to go through the Lord of the Rings films, just focusing on one single thing all the way through, like camera angles. Like, this is the camera angles track where we're going to go through and we're just going to discuss the camera angles in every scene, every camera angle as we go through, and just kind of focus on the way that the camera angle storytelling happens and the patterns that we see in that. We could do another fan track. Then we could do another one, as you say, like color,
And occasionally we
lighting.
could bring,
Yeah,
yeah. And for each of those, we could bring in like a director of photography. We can
we
bring
could.
in
We could bring
somebody
in
that might be
folks.
able to
I was
speak
thinking,
to
wouldn't it
some
be fun
aspects
to?
of that from,
Wouldn't it be fun to? I mean, could you
but
imagine doing a live fan tracks episode with Bear McCreary on like
yeah.
an episode of Rings of Power?
And do you know who would love to do that? Bear McCreary.
Yes, that is true. That is true. Yeah, yeah.
Well, we should have him back on anyway because we haven't had him to talk about season 2.
Season 2. Yeah,
And then maybe we
exactly.
can plant that seed and be like, you know what we really want to do with
Yeah,
you?
yeah,
And
exactly.
Stephen would do it with us for Stephen Gallagher would do it for us for War of the
For
Rohirrim.
War of the Rohirrim. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Um, yeah, no, it would be really cool. So yeah, it's that kind of
And
thing. Yeah, yeah. That that kind of thing would
Phil
be
was
great
saying
fun.
so like extra commentary tracks, but fan produced instead. Yep.
Exactly.
Basically,
That's
it'd be like our analysis
yeah. Fan
commentary track
tracks.
alongside.
The idea of fan tracks is it's such a brilliantly simple idea. It's like, I mean, of course, it's the the pathway for this was was paved by the MST3K folks, ages ago. But basically it's kind of like that, kind of like their riff tracks, except analysis instead of comedy, basically.
Yeah.
Not to say that
A little comedy.
little comedy, but again, the point is not going through and making jokes all the time. The point is going through and, doing analysis and having fun. So anyway, like that would, that concept, the concept of fan tracks, this is something that we have a few of them up already in the collaboratory. I think my favorite one I've been a part of yet is Nubetta and I.
I was going to say it had to be you and Nubetta.
Yeah. Nubetta and I did a fan track for the Rankin Bass Hobbit, and it was phenomenal. It was so much fun as he and I watched the film together and just kind of talked through it. That was really, really fun. So anyway, so there, the idea is one that we've had for a while. And I think it's fan tracks are awesome. And we've wanted to do more anyway. So, because I thought of that because there's more that we could do besides fan tracks as well. I mean, I think, Maggie, even if you and I were to do a more fully produced, some more fully produced stuff for Other Minds and Hands, some of the stuff that we're doing, we could broadcast live, even if, as you say, it's not like a complete show at all, right? Again, even if we were doing, you and I were doing not just a complete walkthrough commentary track, but a scene where we're going to pause it and advance and go back and stuff.
Yeah.
We'd have to have a scene that a screen that you and I could both see, right? While we did that. But
so that's a studio day.
Yeah, but we could broadcast potentially, you and I, just you and me on camera doing our discussion. No reason we can't share that with people, and then we could share the completed production and stuff too. So there are ways where even if we did do, there might be only, we would still be producing sort of a smaller number of total episodes. Yeah, total. I wasn't sure because episodes, theoretically, there could be 2 or 3 Other Minds and Hands episodes, that would be part of the production of a single show. Basically a single, I don't know now what noun to use, but a single session, a single video we'd be producing. So that if we were to do something, so take one of the examples, one of the close analysis examples that we were giving, right? Say we wanted to do, I would love to do that, the one I suggested, the case study of a quote unquote close adaptation, right? Looking at scenes that everybody agrees follows the book really closely, and doing a really close reading of both the book and the film. I think doing a little series of those, where we choose a few examples, maybe 2 or 3 examples, and maybe spend a few episodes doing it.
Like our openings.
Yeah, like the openings. Yeah. That would be, I think, my teaching sense tells me we would learn a lot from that. I don't know what, but I feel confident we would learn a lot from that inquiry. And it would be a really interesting series.
Purely out of curiosity, is there one that's already in your mind? This is a very close adaptation that I would like to discuss?
So...
Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, I was trying to think of scenes. So the first thing I did, I remember when I was thinking about this, was that, and one of the reasons why I'm so confident that this is going to be fruitful is that it was really hard to find specific example. I couldn't think of a single scene in the Lord of the Rings films that fits my criteria. Where it's where people are that scene is exactly like the book describes. I mean, it doesn't happen anywhere. As faithful as people like to call those films, scene by scene, each scene is quite different. And from the analogous scene in the book. And so that kind of closeness, the first place I would go looking, I think, would be Sorcerer's Stone. The Harry Potter films, especially the first Harry Potter film,
are
is
very
quite
visual.
famous for following the book very closely, even slavishly in the opinion of some. And so that's one of the first places that I would look, as because of that reputation. I would look there to see if there's a scene that we could find where
I feel
yeah.
like that's a really good like first exercise moment just
Hmm.
for the ease of access for most people. Even if you haven't seen it, you're familiar with the world and it'd be a handy thing to talk about. I would also love to kind of drive it into a comparative bit like we did with openings.
Yeah.
So the same way we're looking at openings in three different versions, let's look at a scene in three different versions. And one is close, one is medium, one is loose. So being able to take a look at a singular scene and say, look, this one did it close.
Right.
Let's talk about it.
Right.
This one did not. Let's
Yeah.
talk about it.
So okay, so
Bring some comparisons.
one of the criteria, like the baseline for me, the baseline the baseline criterion of this kind of scene is that the dialogue has to be as close to identical as possible. Like a scene where they're just quoting the book. They're just using the dialogue straight out of the book. And that
Shakespeare, Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen. Yeah. Little Women.
there are
Little Women,
places
maybe.
in Austen films where that would work, though fewer than many people think, but or might assume. But
Dickens. There's quite a few really close Dickens adaptations.
yeah, yeah, I think it would be interesting to choose like a sort of classic novel adaptation, like a British period piece, right?
Mhm.
As one example, something like I'm sure there's a scene from Harry Potter we could. Um, uh, sorry,
I thought that was my stomach for a second. I'm glad
no,
it was
not your
me.
stomach, my dog. Um, uh, To Kill a Mockingbird. That's an interesting example. Are you
You
thinking
know,
of
I've never seen.
like the
I've never
Gregory
seen
Peck
that.
one from like the old one? That's a really interesting. I haven't seen that one in years, but wasn't it Gregory Peck who played
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I
Atticus?
technically
Yeah,
have seen it, but I was in eighth grade and did
yeah.
not study any of this stuff yet. So
I
that could
don't.
be good too. It could be fresh for both of us.
Yeah, yeah. It would be interesting. I'm not 100% sure if it's close enough. And again, like
Well,
by close, I don't mean generally faithful. So like I saw JJ, you were talking about um, the example of Christopher Lee and Saruman's voice. And like, it is true that I also always felt that Christopher Lee's voice was a wonderful manifestation of what Tolkien describes. But what we would need is a scene in which Christopher Lee as Saruman says exactly what Saruman says in the book, or something very close to exactly what he says. And there aren't
we don't get
those
that.
scenes. We don't get that. We don't get
Like
that.
that alone is so fascinating to me. Like,
Yeah.
really?
I mean, I kept, I was
Wow.
trying not to, I'm like, I won't be too critical, but like every single scene, and again, this isn't um, it's not a, this isn't a criticism of it. Like or even
Observation.
right. This isn't even me like trying to produce evidence that like can be taken to argue that the Lord of the Rings adaptations aren't faithful. Like that's not the point. The point is that on a scene by scene basis, there are enough differences that you
Hmm.
can't just put the book scene and the film scene side by side and see like and really compare point by point what people say, how they move, what they talk about, like the how objects are manipulated, like in like that's what I want to see. I want to see like how in these different media they do a similar, like the same thing differently. So like for
Yeah.
instance, I do think um the scene in which obviously it will go probably without saying that when I say the Pride and Prejudice adaptation, I'm thinking of the Colin Firth one. When I think of the Colin Firth Mr. Darcy proposes for the first time to Elizabeth scene, that one I think would probably work because their dialogue back and forth between Elizabeth and Darcy when he applies to her at the Collinses' house near Rosings, the one when she refuses him. The dialogue there is pretty close to I know the dialogue from the book pretty well, and I think it's pretty close to the dialogue in the book. So looking at the kind of information that Austen gives us in that scene in the novel, and the kind of information in the way that the story is, how the added elements that the visual adaptation brings to the table, the added elements that the book brings to the table of being able to have the narrator tell us what they're thinking, which the film can't do. Like, both have advantages and disadvantages, and being able to really kind of put your finger on how that works. That's what I want to see. And there's no scene like that. I can't think of a scene like that in the films, in the Lord of the Rings films.
Yeah. I'm laughing because I feel like we were starting about like, hey, let's talk about other things and other ways that we can grow. And I think you're absolutely right, but all we've done is create like a new playlist for ourselves. I'm like, yep, let's do that. That sounds really fun.
Yeah, exactly.
It falls right in line with the openings thing that we did though. So I feel like that makes sense. Like we could put all of our openings together into one like playlist, so to speak. And that's like a thing that we did. If we now go into deep dive scene analysis, pick a scene, and we get to start with Jane Austen. I can very easily see it with Romeo and Juliet, with Emma. There's a couple different things that we could do. We still have to do Nosferatu and Anne of Green Gables as well for Kickstarter requests.
Yes.
So like those would be really interesting ones.
Oh man, Nosferatu
that's
a whole thing. Yeah. That's a whole thing.
I mean, I haven't watched it yet, so that's a new one. But I feel like with each of these, though, like we want the general conversation about that text as an adaptation, but then being able to distill it down where we're looking at like a 35-second scene, which we could play on YouTube, and then do deep analysis just on that bit by bit. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, it would be pretty cool. It would. So.
And we need to do a fan track. So I feel like we've come up with a few things that we want to try, and if you guys are game, we want to try that over the coming weeks, months.
Yes.
While still fitting in discussion of casting, which we should probably do if we want to do, and interviews and things like that.
Yes. No, the simple question of, but what topics can we think of to cover has never been an overwhelming problem with Other Minds and Hands. There are always things that we're not always prepared in a given week to execute the discussion because, if I
didn't have time to watch that
exactly, if I've gotten time to watch it or whatever is a different question. But yeah, I think but even again, when we're thinking about these other things, like when we're thinking about the scene comparisons, when we're thinking about even things like doing Nosferatu and Anne of Green Gables, like those are both really interesting questions. And one of the things that both of those, Anne of Green Gables and Nosferatu, have in common, and something that Anne of Green Gables and Nosferatu have in common is not a topic I thought I would be discussing today, because you would think that's not a wide field, really. But one of the things that they have in common is that both of them have at their root a beloved book, a modern adaptation, which is related very directly to a classic and established film adaptation. So there is a classic, established, I would almost say canonical, Anne of Green Gables adaptation. Yeah. And like Anne of Green Gables has had an adaptation that like everybody thinks of when they think of that adaptation, like it is the picture it's going to be in the back of everybody's mind when they're watching Anne of Green Gables. And now there's a modern one, which has to deal not just with the books, but with the other adaptation as well. You can't ignore it if you're doing an Anne of Green Gables adaptation. Nosferatu, of course, was very pointedly, as I understand, haven't seen it yet, looking forward to it, but haven't seen it yet, Nosferatu was very pointedly relating itself to the original Nosferatu film, which of course is one of the classic films of all time. I mean, it was a pivotally important film in the history of film as a genre. But and of course, a famous adaptation of a beloved book, Dracula. So, anyway, so both of those two things they're in like a three-way situation, right? Like Rings of Power, in a sense, which has to deal with the Peter Jackson
What
films
came
as well
before?
as the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah,
Um,
and especially for ones that are very aware of where they've come from. I mean, just that like observation of how did they pay tribute to that? Do you guys see how they pay tribute to that? Let's talk about some of the things that might
yeah,
reflect. And I remember talking to the game designers at Lotro when they said, "Well, we don't mind if it looks like Peter Jackson's world." You know, there's
right,
just these little like
right.
it's okay if these things speak to each other. And obviously Rings of Power, like they hired Alan Lee and John Howe, they wanted it to be in the same
Yes, yeah,
the same space
yeah,
that wouldn't alienate us. That's not right or wrong. It's just interesting. And then sometimes people choose a totally different vibe, like Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet.
hmm
Let's put them in modern day with guns and cars and
right,
Hawaiian shirts. And
right.
how does that
Which is a
change our
thing that the theater
interpretation?
world has been doing with Shakespeare for, you know,
Totally.
decades, somewhere
Yeah,
between
yes,
decades and centuries. Yeah, yeah,
exactly. Modern retellings of like a World War One version of Macbeth.
yes,
Yep, that
absolutely,
exists.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I saw one. No, it was World War II. But I saw when I was in grad school. There was a production where it was set in World War II of Macbeth, actually.
I
So
saw, I
yeah,
can't remember which World War it was, but yeah, I saw James McAvoy do a modern retelling where it was a modern warfare one of Macbeth, and
yeah,
very good. But yeah, not uncommon at all.
right,
It's
right,
still considered a close adaptation. So
yeah,
that's interesting.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Okay. So anyway, what I was saying is, even with these kinds of projects, like doing a little Nosferatu miniseries, because either of those, Anne of Green Gables or Nosferatu, like there's too much going on with the two different adaptations and
A
the
lot.
book that like we couldn't really do them in one single episode anyway. So if we think of like a little 2 or 3 part miniseries for each one of those, and like say a 3-part comparison series of the like close scenes and stuff. Um, uh, so if we think of those series, for instance, if the goal of those is to be able to do close analysis, I have to admit, like the idea of being able to kind of segment it is kind of liberating to me. That
Yeah.
is like, I've always, with Other Minds and Hands, I've always had in mind the restriction that like we had to be able to like, what was on the screen was what we could do, you know?
Yeah.
But if people are willing to come along with us and basically, if at least some of the Other Minds and Hands live episodes are actually like backstage live
Yeah.
episodes rather than like front stage episodes, then that's the part that I find really liberating. I mean, if
Yeah.
we could actually queue up some clips that you and I could watch and do close analysis of, knowing that people, and we could provide timestamps so people could queue it up themselves and watch along if they wanted to, or they could just wait and watch it afterwards when we were able to put an overlay over top and stuff. Um, it would be fun to be able to do, to be able to do these other kind of these
Yeah.
more intensive studies that we want to do, and to be able to do them in a in that kind of a more sort
And
of formal way.
and the thing I think we've gotten really good at, and I think you guys would find a lot of fun to watch, because if I could have just set up a camera in the studio the other day when we were doing this watch through, or like I know I've said it before, the first time we watch Rings of Power together, we watch it and we don't talk. The second time we watch it and we talk a little bit. The third time we're pausing, we're talking, we're
Yeah,
pointing, we're,
yeah.
being able to record some section of that
It would
is
be
so fascinating
yeah. Well, I
to those
mean,
that have never seen it. I think it
it
would
would
just
be
be a whole
fun.
lot of fun.
Yeah, there's no reason we couldn't do that. Like, do all of that. Like,
Yeah.
do each of
Yeah.
those. Like, to have 2 consecutive weeks, in which we do the. I mean, maybe not the one where we watch and don't say much at all, but like starting with the one where we're talking. And again, sometimes we could do it as a formal fan track. Sometimes, something that we could record and actually produce as a fan track. Sometimes it could just be something that we're talking through. But yeah, I mean, this, as I say, I find the idea of kind of bringing all of you guys who are watching live backstage, basically making it this, at least sometimes, a backstage production, is enormously liberating and enables me to think of some of these things that we want to do in more ambitious ways but again, that wouldn't increase our burden of time. Yeah, I like that.
I'm sorry, you keep freezing on me, but I'm with you 100%. All of this sounds good.
Sorry. Yeah, I think maybe your internet there. Yeah, now you've frozen up again. There we go. I think maybe your internet is fritzing a little bit.
It's starting to say I'm tired.
Yeah. It's showing some weariness, perhaps. I know you're not home, or even home away from home. You're away from home right now. So.
I'm in a hotel currently, so I'm at the whims of the hotel Wi-Fi. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Anyway, like that would be really fun. So.
And much more of like what we do naturally. Like that would be a lot of fun, and I think you guys would enjoy getting a kick out of that. But it wouldn't change us doing what we do here. Yeah. But the schedule might get different. Is what I'm vibing. Like
it's maybe possible. The schedule might get different. And there would be. Yeah. But
I would also love to be able to give people like, hey, for the next 6 months, here's the things that you should watch and be familiar with. This is what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, we could actually kind of map that out. Especially if the one consequence that it would have, kind of doing some discussions that are like discussions that we've done, but looking to actually do them a little bit more thoroughly, like a little bit more effectively. Again, being able to do the close analysis of the screen stuff and everything, and to be able to have some element of post-production, though it wouldn't be intense. It's still not going to be like Rings and Realms, and we're still not going to be in the studio most of the time that we're doing it, but that's okay. Anyway, I think that one of the consequences is going to be it'll be a little bit longer. Like it'll take us possibly a couple sessions to do what we might have tried to cover in one session before, because we'll need to do we'll do some watch along bits, not all of which we would keep or whatever, and because again, it's gonna be backstage, but that's okay. As you say, we can kind of plan that out a little bit. And
I think these guys are used to it. You don't finish Fellowship of the Ring in one episode, do you? In Exploring Lord of the Rings?
No, we don't. No, we don't. No, we don't. So yeah, I think that would be fun, and there would be, and then we could, kind of splice working on the bigger projects in. We could splice in doing some of the pure spontaneous stuff, like discussion of current events and the Wheel of Time series. Add that to the list of series that I want to do. I want to do the Wheel of Time series, little 3-part mini series on the Wheel of Time. Anyway, so yeah, we could splice it in with doing some discussion of live, like current events discussions, and also interviews. Right, when we do those, and we could also splice in live recording of fan tracks as well.
Yeah. So nothing's changing for right now.
Yes, I wonder.
Corey and I will decide what's next. You're not here next week anyway, right?
That's true. I won't be home from Europe. Going to Europe for Belgium, yes, going to Willowmoot this coming weekend. So this weekend I won't be back and ready to broadcast on Monday. So, but I should be back after that in May, Cinco de Mayo. I think I'll be back. Are you then? Are you traveling then?
I think I'm. Yep, May 5th. I think I'm fine.
Okay. Yep. All right. So we can plan on something for that. do you want to try to do a fan track next time?
I know. I'm like, do you want to give it a go? I
Let's
think
have a
that'd be a lot
go.
of fun.
It would be fun.
Okay.
Want to do
Do
an
you have anything
episode
in
of
mind?
Rings of Power, or do you want to
I'm like, we're just
do one of our Lord of the Rings ones? Do you want to do like a do you want to try the camera angle one or the lighting one or the
I mean, I want to start with season 2, episode 2 of Rings of Power purely because it's the
okay.
one not done in
Yeah.
my block.
Okay. Okay.
So
Let's
like
do a
it's a
Rings of
good
Power
warm
episode.
up. You and I can do it in our sleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's start with that one. So everybody, like, I realize it's weird. Season 2 of episode 2, season 2,
Right.
Rings of Power. Like, yep, we're starting in the middle. Have at it. But
Sure.
if we start with that one, it's about an hour. It's a good ease in, and then we'll step into the next thing. But I like that. That'd be fun.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That ought to work. That ought to work. Okay. We'll give it a shot. We'll give it a shot. We'll hope for that on Cinco de Mayo. And then
Although
we'll
May the
see. And
5th.
then maybe we'll
Well, it's
also
just missed May the 4th. Maybe we should do a Star Wars thing.
that's true.
No, we'll stick with Rings of Power.
Let's stick with the plan. Let's stick with the plan. Of
Okay.
course, we could do a fan track of like a Star Wars, like episode 1 of Andor or something like that. Like,
Oh, I really want to rewatch Andor.
me
That could be
too.
fresh and new. Do you want to do that?
We could.
Okay, watch this space. We'll confirm ASAP, but it'll
Yeah.
either be Rings of Power or Andor.
Yeah. We'll figure
I
it out.
know.
Because I do need to
Sorry, I
rewatch
just got
Andor so I
whispered
can
new
watch
season is
season
out.
2. Yeah.
I know, new season. And I just heard the last episode of the new season is going to step us straight into Rogue One. And then Rogue One is going to step us straight into A New Hope. Well, it already does.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
Yep.
it's gonna be good times. All right, so we'll either do Andor or Rings of Power.
Yes. So we'll do a live fan track next time in 2 weeks.
Sounds good. May 5th. Safe travels, friend.
All right. Very good. Do you want to you don't want to try to get back to the Narnia casting in 5 minutes, do
I'm
you?
like, I do, but let's leave it at 6 minutes. So we have six
Okay.
minutes left to
6
talk about
minutes.
Meryl Streep and
Meryl
casting.
Streep as Aslan in Narnia.
Okay, so first of all, the news came out April 1st, so a lot of people thought that this was a joke. Interesting choice of time to announce
I
something.
don't think so. There was a report earlier on, which was dismissed as a joke, despite the fact that it wasn't April 1st. Like, oh no, they can't be thinking of that. And then more news dropped, and it was right around the April Fool's time.
My initial question, why do you think people thought it was a joke?
Uh,
What is it about this announcement that feels so foreign?
I so there are adaptation choices, and then there are adaptation choices. Making the adaptation choice to have some elves have dark skin is one kind of adaptation choice. To do a Lord of the Rings production where you recast Gandalf as a woman is a different adaptation choice. That's still an adaptation choice. And of course, many such sorts of adaptation choices have been and will be made. And that's what that can be interesting, right? Things that moves things into the direction of that third category of adaptations that I made ages ago, the modulation adaptations, where you're deliberate. It's like the World War II Macbeth thing, right?
Okay.
You can do that. I often think, not always, but often find that something that radically changes the constellation of the characters is actually, it's a really interesting illustration. Phil suggests as an illustration, doing an Othello production with all black actors except Othello's white. Totally a
That's
thing you can
happened.
do, right? Yeah, that's totally happened, right?
Patrick Stewart, I think.
I
Did it?
yeah, I didn't see it, but yeah. Um, the comparison that I made of doing a Lord of the Rings production where you cast a woman as Gandalf is, in my opinion, a small step in the direction of what doing a Narnia production with a woman cast as Aslan is. Like, that is as nothing, not as nothing, but it's a small step compared to the much bigger step. And the reason, it's an adaptation step that involves actual theology. Like, it approaches actual, like, theological beliefs of viewers. Because Aslan is not parallel to Jesus, is not a figure of Christ. Aslan is Jesus. Like, Aslan is, like, that's what is made explicit. He's not a symbol. He's not an allegory. He is a manifestation of Jesus within this fictional world. Like, the whole of the Narnia concept is, it is a supposition, that's Lewis's word for it, a supposition of, like, what if there were this world and Jesus manifested himself in that world? Is it theoretically possible that Jesus could manifest himself as a woman in a different world? Yes, it is. But that's a complete, that you're adding this massive dimension to your supposition, and in such a way that you're no longer exactly doing the same supposition, the same fundamental premise. It's hard. It's really
No,
difficult.
that's what's really interesting, because you're kind of figuring out, like, yeah, why is it a big deal? And
Yeah.
that's what's a neat question about it. And coming from Greta Gerwig, you kind of expect to be challenged on some of these things,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what she does, and in
Yes.
I would say, a fairly non-confrontational way, but in a very factual. Here's a thing for you to ponder. I want
Right.
you to think about this.
Right. And,
It did not strike me at all as a problem. So
yeah.
I find that really interesting to see the reactions, and I understand why it's like, like Snape being cast as a black man. Yeah, it's jarring. Sure, it's different than
Different
the
category.
script. Different category. Different
Different
category.
category. Like,
I
wholly
do
different
wonder, like,
category.
how you, not you personally, but like how the general you, like how it would be viewed. Like Dogma, Alanis Morissette was God.
Mm-hmm.
Is it because God is also ambiguous? God could be a woman, that maybe isn't as problematic, whereas Jesus Christ is very clearly.
That's one thing. Yes. Yeah, that's one. That's one issue. Um, uh, though I would say, uh, I don't know very many Christians for whom Dogma is their favorite movie.
Yeah.
But I do know many Christians for whom Narnia are their favorite books. Right. So, I mean, it's a
A
lot of it.
decision.
A lot of it. It's a huge decision. A lot
It's
of
a
it has to
decision.
do, like, I mean, I frankly, if assuming that it actually happens, I frankly would honestly expect, I'm not saying I would encourage, I will watch them, but I would expect wholesale boycotts by Christians. Wholesale. That's what I would expect. It might not happen. And again, I'm not saying I would encourage it. But yes, and exactly as Sharon says, Dogma was written deliberately to challenge
Yes.
traditional theology, right? And again, that is not what Narnia does. It does many things. It does not attempt to challenge traditional doctrine, and so to do.
But a director can. Yeah.
You can, sure. I mean, again, like, it isn't that you can't. It's just, again, like,
It's a choice.
one of the things that it quickly made me think about, I was trying to think of an adaptation decision that was analogously huge, basically. And I'm having a hard time. Honestly, I was having a hard time coming up with a parallel. I mean, yeah, it's it's a lot. it's it's a lot, because what it calls into question. Again, I'm not even using word like it undermines or something. Like people might use that language, but to be as neutral as possible, it calls into the simple thing. We are casting a woman as Aslan. Broadcasts. We are calling into question the fundamental connection between the Narnia story and Christianity. I'm not like, that doesn't mean it automatically is like we're like it doesn't prove that it's abandoning it. It doesn't prove that, but like it calls it into question. It will certainly make any Christian who hears the news ask.
Sure.
It goes be somewhere between, oh no, like, are they going to try to undermine the connection between Christianity and Narnia, to on the other end being like flying off the handle and saying, this proves that, this is going to be some kind of godless production, like I mean, it's just like, that's what's at stake here. Like that's, and again, I know this is something that is hard, I think, to understand from the outside, from the outside of Christianity, I mean, to understand but it really does have to do with, with the fundamental question. And that, I mean, if you asked me, what is the core of the Narnia story? To C.S. Lewis, the core of the Narnia story was that supposition. What would happen if there were this other fantasy world in which Jesus manifested himself?
And we don't know where she's going with it. I mean,
no.
I would say, like, if it's a question of whether it really matters if Jesus is a boy or a girl, that's one question. If it's pushing a point that it absolutely should be this, that's another question. If it's presuming it doesn't really matter one way or the other, so it's one of those things I find really difficult to speculate on until we have more information, because we don't know what the purpose is.
Right.
But
no, we don't know much of anything. Rebecca was just asking, and I don't know the answer to the question. Was it announced if Aslan is going to be visually depicted as a lioness, or is it just that Meryl Streep is going to be voicing a male lion?
We don't know.
We don't know. We don't know.
I'm putting a pin in that because there's a lot of things I want to say about casting decisions as well, and just kind of how that can affect adaptations. But it's 6:05, so we're going to pause for now.
Yeah, it was 11 minutes, not 6 minutes, but it was pretty.
We do. It's at least scratching the surface of there's more to talk about here, and we do know it's Magician's Nephew now, so that's a whole other conversation too. So I feel like we need to have a Narnia chat at some point. Maybe with Brenton.
Totally. Yeah, we could bring in Brenton for it.
We should bring somebody in to have this chat with us.
For those who don't know, Brenton Dickinson is our resident Signum University C.S. Lewis guy.
And potentially Gabriel. I feel like he would also be really good on this point. So, yeah. We've got a few experts at Signum that would be fun to have this chat with. It would be.
Anyway, yes. The Magician's Nephew. See, the Magician's Nephew is doing something wrong that is just wrong in a different way, and it's fine. Like, it's fine.
It's not fine.
No,
we'll discuss
it's not good.
No.
But like it's.
But it also, like, if she's really trying to like throw her hands up in the air and do her own story, well, then I guess this is how you do it. You just change whatever you want.
You just.
But then why?
I mean. I don't doubt that they would say they're sticking closely to the books, just because like the publishers have been screwing this up for years now. But it's all good. It's all good.
So we're not here next week.
That's right.
And the following week, we're either going to do Andor or Rings of Power Season 2, Episode 2.
Yeah.
So prepare for both, people, and we'll surprise you on the day which one it is.
That's right. And it'll be our first official backstage episode where you guys, the live attendees, you guys will be in backstage on the recording of a production that'll be released later. And in this case, a Fantrax production.
Watching us create content. That sounds good. Yay.
Exactly. All right, cool. Awesome.
Thanks, gang. Happy 100. Here's your high five.
That's right. High five. 100 episodes. Thanks, everybody. And I just would want to close by just noting how wonderful it is to have you guys with us, all of you who have been with us and watching the discussions that we have had, the questions that you have raised, the suggestions that you guys have made. You guys have been a really huge part of this. And that's why from the beginning, as we've been saying and thinking about, what we can do and how we can do things moving forward, the one thing we know that we cannot lose is the opportunity to connect live with folks. So thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for being a part of this. And we're looking forward to the next stage.
Definitely. Thank you guys.
Very good. Thanks, everybody. We will see you guys in 2 weeks. Bye now.